Don't feel like it has to be a final draft. We're gonna come back and revise this, looking a little bit at transitions and connections of our ideas in a minute. I'll give you about 3 or 4 ideas to kind of jot down some stuff. Lists and bullet points are fine, full sentences are fine for now. So begin.
Let's pause there.
Yeah.
Okay. I was ready to dig in. I'm thinking some places where he could have used transition words and.
Okay, great. Cool. Well, thanks for doing the role play.
Thanks for hearing me.
Yeah. So I guess first what I'm interested in is what did you feel like went well in the role play, and what after now doing the role play do you think you, if you had a chance to do it again, would you want to do differently?
You guys are very compliant. I would have been interested to see how you guys would have kind of pushed that line a little bit. We talked a little bit earlier, Kate, about if kids do like boundaries, and they do, but they want to see you establish the boundary. They don't want to do it themselves. It's not as interesting. So a little bit less.
So in terms of what you think went well and what you would try differently next time, certainly we could try that differently, but
Sure.
Thinking about your own execution or planning of this practice.
I think one of the
What do you
big
think?
things with graphics, and I think it's, especially me being an English teacher and also speaking about my personal character, when I'm reading something, there are certain things that stand out to me. I'm always very sensitive to word choice and connotation and the actual structure mechanics. I spend so much time writing. So that's an assumption that I'll make that many kids won't, about backgrounds that I don't think many kids will be that sensitive to. So again, it's a little bit being more open to it, or be a little bit more obvious about it. So what I would do differently perhaps would be in that first paragraph, I would highlight in some kind of fashion what the transition words are, and then perhaps open up with, well, this first transition word I highlighted because of X, Y, and Z. It's important because, and then kind of lay it out like that, very formulaically. And then the next one, like, all right, you already saw why this one was important to me. What was important about it? What about the second one? It could be related to the first, it could be something different. But if you're trying to...
Don't worry about that.
That's a nice system, better than ours. But it's, part of it is to kind of generate an atmosphere of openness and of questioning. One of the biggest things, and one of the big struggles I have with is combating that, oh no, I'm wrong syndrome. That's okay, that's the whole point. That's how we get to the right answer. You know, it's kind of the heart of cooking. I ruined that dish, let me just make a new one. No one really died, hopefully, in the restaurant. But again, that'll be one of the cues right there. Just kind of use that as an opportunity to make the kids be emboldened, speak up, again, create and further hammer down on that environment of ownership that I talked about briefly earlier. Thing I did well, I'm very conversational in my lecture approach. So since I do talk a lot, I try to make it a little bit more friendly, so I hold kids' interests. That is one of the things. You don't want to go on there on and on all day and kind of be Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller, but you still, in English, unfortunately, it's a heavily spoken class. The oral is a big component. So trying to not necessarily dumb down the content, but to informalize the approach and the dispensation of that information, I think is really important, because then the kids are going to be more drawn in. And then once they have and start mastering that information, then I can then push them to start speaking more formally and being a little bit more authoritative and speaking in a more masterful fashion. So kind of starting low and then ending high.
What would be next? So, like, what would be an answer that would be perfect in us giving an answer in response to number one? And then what would be a response that would be like a gateway that would help you hammer home the objective that you wanted us to walk away with ministering?
Sure. One of the things that you've noticed is that first question is actually a repeat of something that we were just talking about. So part of that is a kind of check for understanding. So if you were able to contribute to the more informal class discussion, you can knock out the first part of that question. So an ideal answer would have what you said just there, and that now become your sounding board or your starting point. The next answer would be, well, to signal me that you mastered it, I would then want you to go, since the question is, if it does, how does he, what is his opinion, how does it change? So in order to answer this correctly, what is his opinion of the mystery? So ideally, they would pull something from the first paragraph and something in the second when his opinion changes. And then they would then show, because of these two events, we now know that his opinion is more or less this. And then how does he convey this change? There, that can be a tricky one, because some kids will go, well, because he wrote it, it changed. Yes, but he used transition words. That's the goal of the class. That's what we're talking about. That is the overarching theme. So that's actually another area where I could improve, just making the objective and the point of the class a little bit more overt, saying again, we're talking about transitions. Your answer should talk about his use of transitions, why they're important, what function are they using. So going back to that earlier analogy about the lifting. They're doing a lot of lifting, but we're not seeing it. This is the part where we make their work shown and visible. And then, how does your opinion or reaction change? This is a question or style of question I like to use because sometimes I've often found in the past, at least with the kids that I've taught, they like to debate and be argumentative, but it's difficult for them to be able to use the text to their advantage. So this is now, instead of starting with, the text says this, which means that, I'd rather go with, well, I think this way because, or I formulated this opinion because of what was said in the text. So I start with them and then finish with the text, as opposed to starting with the text and then finishing with them. It's kind of a flip-flop. And then ideally for a perfect answer there, they kind of go through their opinion, but I really try to de-emphasize rather the use of the first person. Like, I think, therefore, maybe something a little bit more personal. It's apparent because of this, that kind of thing. Why does your opinion change? Well, in order to get that correct, you have to show me if their opinion changes and why it changes, and try to cover both bases. If it's something as apparent as, or simple as this, it's kind of a gimme.
One question I have
Yeah.
is, at the end of this lesson, how would you be able to tell whether students have mastered the dimension or the standards that you were hoping they would during the lesson?
So part of it would just be, I thought long and hard about this, and again, it's going back to what I was speaking earlier. This would be embedded in kind of an essay unit. So I would have liked to have done was, if they had an essay, this was just all kind of been in a very long, elaborate practice for them, either working on their essay or a partner's essay, and then focusing on, okay, where are their transitions? If they don't have any transitions, you need to put some in there, and then show me why, and kind of explain and justify the reasoning in their answers, and then go from there. But if there was not an instance for which there was a kind of essay or something written that they could then work on, then it could be, I'd probably wind up finishing this lesson with either another excerpt from Frederick Douglass that they haven't read or we haven't read together, and just do something similar, and just focusing specifically and make it more overt. He uses and, or, but, and another transition word in this excerpt. Why is it important that he uses it in this section? What is the meaning of this section? What is the theme? What is the overarching point? How does this relate to our earlier conversation? So again, it's just them being able to do the mechanical skill. Oh, this is the transition, I found it. What does it mean? Oh, it means this, and I know it's doing this and fulfilling this function in the paragraph. And then going a little bit deeper. Okay, now that I have that, now I can really tell what the author's trying to do, or I can take a reasonable guess.
Gotcha.
But going back to your earlier point, I missed part of your question. An answer that is kind of a gateway but indicates there's room for mastery is anything where they're able to mechanically identify, oh, like here's a transition, but they're not able to tell me what the purpose is or what it's actually doing. And that signals to me, okay, the student understands that, oh, I'm supposed to be looking at this where I found it, I just don't know what to do with it. And then that becomes an area where, while kids are working on extension or early finisher work, I would then circle back and kind of start a one-on-one revising process with them. Or the next day, while the students are perhaps working on a writing workshop or doing something a bit longer, I would have something separate for them. Yeah. Anything else?
No, I think that was all helpful for me to kind of visualize the rest of the lesson. 10:57 right now. Any other questions that we have before we kind of close out and see if anything you've got to ask us? Any questions that you have?
No, I do have a question about what your next 30 minutes or so looks like. I know that you were scheduled to finish here at 11, but do you have 30 additional minutes?
I do. I have to be at UIC today, but it's around 5 o'clock.
Okay,
So,
cool. Because I think that when we wrap up here, our new team members, a big piece of Noble, as I'm sure that you know, is our culture and discipline.
yeah.
And our new team members are having a culture and discipline PD next door, and they're looking at some videos and thinking through some examples. I just think it would be great if you could sit in there
I
for
would love
about
to.
20 minutes. They have lunch. It was ordered individually, so I
Sure.
apologize because
It's
they might
fine.
be eating.
I'm watching my figure anyway.
I apologize for that, letting if you could pop in, that would be
Moving's
great.
very stressful. I gain a lot of weight. It's fine.
A lot of fast food, I guess.
Yes. something like that.
Any questions that you have for us before we transition into that section?
Definitely. Because of the nature of my school and it being high needs, I had to do a lot of times scaffolding and trying to corral No, if we have the, no, I'm in my element, it's fine. This kind of helps keep the weight off. But, so if we have our, remember from statistics, our standard deviation graph, we have that 80% right here. You know, I was always pulling from that 10 to this 10 and trying to squeeze everybody into the middle. I don't know what your students are like now, but my question is this an appropriate level lesson in terms of rigor, in terms of content, in terms of everything else for a 9th grade class in this building? Or is it lacking, or is it too difficult? I assumed it was too lax, too easy.
So I think the text could definitely be used in the 9th grade classroom. A lot of AP classrooms use excerpts from this text as well, so I think like, the text could certainly be used at a 9th grade level. My feedback and the thoughts would be on the alignment of the lesson to the standard. So I think in terms of the like the question or set of questions at the end, I think like my major feedback as a coach would be let's revise these questions so that they can more directly align to the skills that we're trying to have students practice and assess. So like they're able to think about transitions here, but like how can we either find a text that already has more of them in there, or can the task more directly ask students to think like what are the relationships between some of these sentences? Maybe you give them a few different sets of sentences, right, and say like what transition would you use? Let's say like we're in Frederick Douglass's shoes and he's decided that he wants to make his transitions clearer. Just so that most of their practice, if not all of their practice, is directly aligned to this major skill that we're trying to assess by the end of the lesson. So I think like the text could definitely fit there. Right. If I like seeing this at like any 9th through 12th grade class, I'd want to say like this text can work, but let's revise the questions that go along with the text so that the practice that students do is much more aligned to the skill that they're trying to get. So I think like definitely this level could work with some revision to the lesson, which you know is natural. Like that's part of the coaching process as we work to revise and adjust lessons to make sure they're as aligned as possible.
Sure, but it wasn't like way off base.
No, I think like this text is a great one to use.
Okay. Yeah, and I was on the same page as David, just as I was experiencing the lesson, like where my mind went to, even and just like when you were talking us through the other parts.
Yeah.
It's like where are the lack of transitions in this excerpt, and like where are two sentences kind of together, and you have to infer the transition as opposed to there being a signal word that shows the transition. And when I asked the question about kind of like what are you trying to hit home, I felt like that would be like a big takeaway from this lesson, or like a big next step with this lesson. It's like, all right, now go through and identify places, like David said, where you put yourself in Frederick Douglass's shoes and you're like looking at this and like, where could I have made this more obvious that, you know, like I was transitioning from one thought to another, or from one emotion to another, or one experience to another. And I think that like if what came before this was either a lesson with the text or practicing with a smaller text where it's more obvious, and then transitioning into one where it's less obvious here and it's a little bit more rigorous. Because I think that the rigor can meet the kids anywhere. It's all about how you unpack it and work with them to be able to access it.
Got it. Okay.
Any other questions then?
That was the first one that jumped out at me. I'm trying to reassess now.
Yeah, and whether about the lesson or the school in general, or
no, primarily the questions I had about the school were answered in the first round interview and also our report today.
Great.
Everything has been very straightforward. I've been able to glean enough from the website that I'm pretty satisfied.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So is that session starting?
Yeah, started 3 minutes ago.
Okay.
Perfect. So I can walk you over there.
Sure.
Thank you again for taking the time to prepare this, and
yeah.
of course I know it can be a little bit awkward when there are actual students in the room.